And it was like at a tech event, and so, oh,
We're live. That was the
hey,
cue. It was a countdown. Like there was a countdown there. You could see it. This is Matt. I'm Bret. We're live,
hey,
and
yeah,
we're here doing Q&A with you today. So one of the funnest parts of doing this job is I get to have people on the show and we get to hang out. So that's what we were just doing, and we were telling stories. So
and
welcome.
actually, one of the comments is about that foam pit at PAX, where it went, as I said, went bad for that girl. There was somebody who jumped into the pit and it, like, was not as soft. as it should
Wow. Oh, so this
So
is
they were
legendary.
listening.
That foam pit made me nervous ever
Yeah, that
since
was
that
like
PAX where it was that bad for that girl.
that's just recent. Like I feel like that's a year or two ago.
You all are so lucky that you have PAX up there. I've never been, and I want to go, and it's just no one's going to pay me to be there, so I have to spend real money to go to Seattle. Isn't it Seattle?
So Is it? I don't actually know what PAX is.
Hmm.
I just remember there was some foam pit at some conference. I didn't even know what's
Yep.
PAX.
Yep. Gaming.
Oh, okay.
It's a lot more than it used to be. Let's bring it. Oh yes, accept. Oh look, yeah. See, they have all these things now. They have PAX East in Boston. See, I could totally go. I could totally go. Someone in chat's probably going to remember the origin of PAX. I thought it was gaming. Oh, Paul
Penny
Chen's here.
Arcade
He'll know.
Expo.
He's more cultured than me. Paul Chen is in chat. It's a local friend. Hey, Paul. And Sabine actually must have been because Penny Arcade Expo. Yes. Penny Arcade.
Huh.
Which we could also look up because
Maybe I should go.
um,
It's in September here in Seattle.
the first one was in 2004.
Regions.
Yeah. So the Penny Arcade
Hey, how come?
gentlemen,
Whoa, whoa,
Jerry and
whoa,
Mike.
whoa, 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 whoa! Wait a second. I'm looking at Google. How come I'm not looking at Neva?
That's a good point. I have not made this is Firefox. I have not made Neva my default
Oh, okay.
search engine in Firefox. So well done, sir. Pointing out my I'm a super fan,
you
but
you
of Neva, but
converted me
also
to Neva, and so now when I see you not using Neva, I'm disturbed, and I paid my year.
yeah. So I need to like make it the default, but it should prompt me right. Say please make default.
But actually, I tried doing a few searches this morning, and I had to switch back to Google because Neva wasn't
Ah,
responding.
of course it's unable to sign in now.
Oh,
So
and
great. Okay, super. So yeah,
awesome.
all right. Maybe not that.
Thanks,
Maybe
Brett.
not that. Neva is a great search engine that is. It actually pulls search engine results from Google and Bing, and maybe another one. I don't know. MapQuest. um, and but it's privacy focused, so it doesn't show you ads. It doesn't sell you information. It doesn't. And you can use it for free with ads. But if you pay, I don't know what it is, $3 or $5 a month, it's ad free. So, and it indexes all your content and stores it in the cloud. Such a great idea. I totally do it. I'm sure I'll regret that choice one day. But I actually find that I don't ever find general searching of your own data useful. So, like when we're in email, searching for an email, useful. If you're in Notion or Evernote or Apple Notes or whatever, and you're searching there, useful. If you're searching for a file on your computer using Finder or Windows Explorer, useful. But when you have one that does all that all at the same time,
Yeah.
but first off, none of us ever go to the internet to search our own computer, so that's not. It's a thing that's like
Yeah,
it's a habit. That's like a habit
right.
I have to break.
And
Go
if
ahead.
I'm going to a browser to search for something, I'm looking for the authoritative answer
Right.
on this topic. And chances are I am not the authoritative source of information on this topic.
Right. And why would you
And
go to
if
the
I
internet?
am,
Yeah.
don't I know it?
Yeah. If you know where it's at, then why do you need to search for it? And then
Yeah.
most of us, I don't know, most brains maybe we're all the same, but my brain is usually when I'm thinking about a piece of information, I can usually, if I got to search for it, I can narrow it down to one or two systems that it's in. Like that must be in Evernote or
Right.
that must be in Notion. Or that's probably an email. Like I don't have to search all, I don't need to search my photos, my email and Notion and files and iCloud and Google Drive and all of them all at the same time. Like I probably have a good
Yeah.
sense of where that's just me. I'm also very anal about my
Well,
storage systems.
one of my and thinking of Neva, one of my complaints about Neva is that often in Google I will do a search for, I want to search for things that only happened in the last, 6 months or a year.
Mm-hmm.
And Google search, you can go into the date search and change it to, last month, last year, last. I think that's it. And there's an extension I added on that gives me like last 3 months, last 6 months, last 9 months, last year, last 3 years. And so I look at those kinds of searches, and Neva also has those kind of searches, but they don't work.
Oh,
They
yeah.
I've said, okay, so show me only results from the last year, and I get results from 2015.
Right.
It's like, this is not what I wanted.
That's also like when you try to do the fancy Google searching and you put
Yes.
the minus something, the plus something, cite colon, and put things in quotes, and then it shows you everything other than that, and you're like, why did I even bother doing all that stuff?
Right.
Well, welcome everyone. So we're here to talk DevOps. Obviously, not chat about this. Isn't the chat hour? That was what we just had before the show, where we catch up. And I want to go through a couple of news items, and then we're off to the races, focusing on containers, DevOps, cloud, anything you want to talk about there. Bring up the topic. I got Matt here to help break up my long soapbox rants with, an actual other opinion than mine on this channel, which is so rare. Let's talk about it. So real quick, my courses are on sale. I know. They're always on sale. It's Udemy. Everybody puts them on sale. So for Docker's 10th birthday, which was this month, they get the reggae horn. The fact that they even still exist as a company after like every 3 years, there's a question around Docker's ability to continue to be a company. So we worried in 2018 with the rise of Kubernetes and how Docker was going to compete as if it needed to compete. It turns out it actually didn't. So in 2019, they split the company, moved all their enterprise to a different company, Mirantis, and they went back to their roots as a developer tooling focused company. Then they became profitable, and we assume they're profitable. We know their revenue is somewhere around 100 million a year now, which is better than it's ever been, and that's just because the news on the internet leaked that information, and Docker didn't confirm it, but we'll all just assume it's true. And they sell things now, and I sell things about Docker. So if you're one of the 300,000 people that have bought and taken one of my courses, thank you so much. Would love for that to be 500,000. So stretch goals. You can get that here at this link, or you can get the link below, down all the links below in the description. But if you don't have any of my courses, or if you'd like some more of them, or would you like to tell a friend that they're on sale? They're on sale through Saturday for the cheapest price Udemy lets me put them on sale for. You can't go lower than $9.99. It's a fundamental rule of Udemy. No courses ever shall be below $9.99 in American dollars. They do price for different locations in the world, which is amazingly advanced. Like they'll actually in a area of the world where $9.99 turns out to be a lot of money, they actually lower the price of the courses to be reflective of the local economy, which I could never keep up with that on my own system. So I'm kind of glad that Udemy does that for me. Next piece of news. Yay, Docker did the right thing. They heard the community, and even after apologizing for poor communication, which is true, they definitely did not have good communication. I too was confused, which is why I had to spend an hour on the phone with senior executives and C-level staff to try to figure this thing out with the other Docker captains. They finally, a week later, decided, screw it. CEO called an audible. SJ said, we're just not going to do any of that. We're going to reverse all of what we just said. No changes on Docker Hub plans, and we're going to refund everyone their money that they spent money on the last week for converting, but they get to keep their paid accounts for the duration of what they paid for, but they get the money back, which I thought was at least a little bit of a nice thing to all of those that had to scramble trying to figure out, okay, what's the right thing here? Okay, sure, take our money. They just gave it back. So I thought that was pretty cool. I don't feel like there's anything more to talk about that just because we've been talking about it for 2 weeks. So it's over. It's over, people. We can move on. If you've moved off of Docker Hub, sure, I'm sure you're fine wherever you went, but no longer a need to move off of Docker Hub. I just wanted to pull up this tweet because this was a topic, a quick little conversation on the internet that happens to have been had in real life with friends, maybe even with Matt when we were at CVO together. But there are those of us that have gray in our beards, if we have a beard, or gray in your hair, or you've just maybe been around longer than 10 or 15 years in tech. We have an amnesia problem in tech, and it's been written about all sorts of different ways. There you go. Bringing up the DevOps handbook. I only have it in digital form, sadly, but I do have the audio book, the digital book, and then the digital first and second edition. So I think I have it like 3 or 4 times. But it's to me, it's a manuscript for making sure that I am on the right track. And it's not just one person's opinion. It's a nice team of people put together in that book, and then they revised it and released it again in 2001 with new anecdotes and case studies around
2001?
stuff that's... What's that?
You said 2001?
Did I say
They
2001?
released re-release in 2001?
2021.
21.
The-
Okay.
Yeah, 2021. Thank you. Yes, this decade, not 2 decades ago. So if you're in chat, raise your hand, hit the like button, or put in chat, have you read DevOps Handbook? And if you're honest enough, if you haven't read it, why haven't you? There is still so much in there, even as I'm re-listening to it now. This year, I've been re-listening to it, and there's such good reminders in there. Of course, there's a bunch of follow-on books. There's the predecessor book, the book before it, I think, was the Unicorn Project. I think it was the Unicorn
Phoenix.
Project. What's
Phoenix
that? Phoenix
Project.
Project. And then there's the one after that, which is the Unicorn Project. There's two fictional novels about DevOps people. The Phoenix Project, I think you're right, is the first one. And then if we just look up IT Revolution, oh, that's their blog. Where's the books? Someone's going to know in chat before I do. Course books.
The one heading you haven't touched. Yeah, okay.
And then there is the so here's the DevOps Handbook. And these are basically, if you didn't know about IT Revolution, it's a nice collection of books and topics around, the Unicorn Project.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. And then, so the Phoenix Project was the first one, then DevOps Handbook, then the Unicorn Project, and then the one I want to say is, I don't see it yet, War and Peace in IT. Accelerate, which is another very common book around. It's sort of like I haven't actually read it, but it is the next one on my list from this focused area of DevOps and sort of IT change and IT mindset and process management and human management culture and all that stuff. It's the one that I get pointed to the most for what should you read next. And I'll put this on the...
Now, is the Unicorn Project at least a good story? I found the Phoenix Project, I mean, it's kind of hard to read because it's kind of a silly... The story itself it's not written by somebody who writes a really great story that I don't know. I read it.
It's not a thriller.
I need to read this. It's not a thriller. It's not, you got to want to read it to get through the thing.
I'm sipping my tea. Yeah.
Okay.
So I have the Phoenix Project. I couldn't finish it. And it wasn't because it was bad. It was because it was giving me shell shock or PTSD or whatever, because it's cringeworthy for those of us that live it and maybe even still live the reactionary, everything is an emergency, everything's a disaster sort of lifestyle in tech. And I grew up in that. Like in the 90s and 2000s, that was everything I ever knew was reactionary. We couldn't keep up. We were struggling to even maintain the status quo, much less get ahead and think strategically. We were always scrambling. And so that book was tough to read because it was like listening to a novel about my work life, and I just didn't want to hear it.
It's like Napoleon Dynamite. I cannot watch it because it is high school for me, and it's too traumatic.
Napoleon Dynamite is my Wi-Fi password. My Wi-Fi password is vote for Pedro. In case you want to join, in case you want to come and spend time here, you can use my Wi-Fi with that password. Okay. So yeah, there's a bunch of books here. Obviously, I haven't read most of them, but yeah, the DevOps Handbook is sort of, I would say, it is required reading for anyone who wants to get into DevOps, anyone who wants to get into SRE, or anything related around that ecosystem, right? GitOps, anything ops. If you're a developer who has to deploy your own code in any way or be responsible for systems and uptime, it's the first thing I'd have you read. Just because I continue hence back to this tweet, I continue to find people that are hiring or trying to implement DevOps or improve their DevOps, but their culture is, when I look at them and I spend more than a few minutes with them, I realize immediately that this is a culture problem. And you can't change a culture problem with a new tech tool. You've got to change it from management. You can work from the ground up, but it's a lot harder. And that DevOps handbook talks about that. It actually talks about strategies for how do you implement change in a work culture that you may work in that doesn't embrace change. And it talks about stakeholders. It talks about finding the people that are always wanting to find the new and get them on your team and get them sort of to be fans of this new way of doing things that you want to do. And you sort of, it's like a virus. you sort of take over tech through just getting everyone excited about and seeing the results of your change. Most importantly, if you have good results in the changes you're affecting, then you hopefully have data and you can prove it. But that doesn't mean people are going to listen, because people are stuck in their ways and they may not want to do it, even regardless of whether you have sort of empirical data that shows that something is better. Anyway, it's a great book. It's not just, it's not about this is how you do something in Jenkins. That's not the DevOps handbook. It's a great book that I have read more than once because it's worth reading more than once. Side note to that. Have you read the 12 Factors, Matt?
You mean the
12-factor app
in the
website.
12-factor app, the thing that comes out of Heroku?
Yes, that.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
so this is something that I reread. It's very short, and this is something that I reread. There's only 12 of them, so... and people have spun off this and done other things, but this is the original. This is almost 15 years old now, and you can actually go back to GitHub and I think and look at like one of the first commits or whatever. I'm not sure if the website was actually launched from GitHub. It might even have. Well, we had GitHub in 2011, I think. But you can actually go back to the website and look at the original commit on GitHub. But this is something that I reference constantly. I point it out to my clients when they're doing a behavior that does not fit into the model of one of the 12 factors. And I'm not saying you can't grow beyond these because, of course, some of the concepts in here are pretty dated. But when you read them, and they're all very short, right? Like the config one is probably my most commonly referenced one. It's a very short one-page thing. But it speaks...
I would disagree with some of these things. Like the problem. I guess the problem I had with there's like one or two things in 12 factor that are written because of limitations at the time in Heroku, and I feel like this one is one of them where people will see it and think, I should be also storing, you've got your .env file in your in the root of your project, and that sometimes that .env file might reference an API key or a some other secret, and I feel like maybe they've updated this to say don't do that, but originally this 12 factor talked about having keys and stuff in that config, which I mean I think that might have been what there's another topic that we're going to talk about after this, but I feel like that might be how that problem. Credentials to external services. This includes
but that isn't
in the environment.
That's a great point. But then I would ask you, is that really the point of what they're telling you here? Because what is the problem that most people start with? Is they store, and I see this every client that hires me has this problem. If they're going to convert to containers, they've done this before containers, and it's because they could and they got away with it. And the problem really, when I read this, I don't read, I have to store credentials inside a YAML file. Like, I think they're just giving examples. But this is a great discussion. I'm glad you're bringing this up because you can read these and get distracted on the implementation examples they're giving you, rather than the reason. What is the reason? I feel like that's from Matrix. What is the French guy at the second movie? What is the reason? The reason here is that people don't originally, when they first started doing server apps or any apps, they didn't separate environmental config from the app itself. And that's really, instead of it saying store config
Sure.
in the environment, and maybe they're trying to tell you what to do, rather than what not to do. But this might be a better statement of saying, do not store environmental configuration in the application itself. Only make
Sure.
references
Yeah.
that are then put in somewhere else for environments. And that is, if there's ever a code change that I have to do on an app to make it container based, because a common question still is, do you need to change your app to make it work in a container, right? It's a pretty common question in my courses. And the answer is no, unless you store environmental hard-coded information in your application. And the most popular example, if we go back like 15 years, is everyone would assume the database was localhost, because back in the day we all did like PHP and Ruby, and the database Postgres was on the server, MySQL was on the server. So we just hard-coded localhost in there. Or we maybe, and this is actually what happened.
The default Postgres password.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You might have the database name hard-coded, or even the database name even seems innocent, right? Like, of course, we're going to always, every database server we use will have this. Well, what if you want to run 3 of those versions on the same database, 3 of those applications, 3 copies, which is common now in Kubernetes. We can run 3 sales, 3 demo apps, 3 copies of it for demos or sales, or the support team that takes support calls or whatever. And they suddenly people realize, oh, I didn't realize that we would ever do that. So part of the challenge is getting people's mindset into everything they're doing in their app whenever they're writing code. Are they making an assumption? For example, are they even making an assumption that the root of that URL is always going to be the same URL? Is it always going to be the root of a web host? Or could it possibly be a subdirectory, and we need to have an environment variable to be able to change that? It's amazing how many apps I come into that have these assumptions around the parts of their app all being in certain places and looking a certain way. And granted, we can't change every API backend URL dynamically. Like, that probably should be at least something about that standard. But I did have a company just 2 years ago. They were bought by Google. They're a large enterprise security company, and they had apps where they were storing their assumption for accessing the API was that it had to be at the root of a URL. And we wanted to be able to use proxies and different paths to access things. And we had to go back and change a bunch of code just because their assumption was some server.com / we own everything after the /. And it was a false assumption. It was an environmental decision. Anyway, this is a great soapbox moment, because I think it's good to discuss.
I think the problem is that somebody can read 12-factor and think, okay, this is what I need to do. And unless they had heard that last, 5 minutes of discussion, they might assume, okay, environment variable, great, all right, great. I can store these things and check that into the. It's maybe it's too vague, or about security concerns with passwords. Where did the passwords get stored? That's the part I don't like.
Yeah.
I feel like there's like one of the other factors is, it was a particular weakness of Heroku, and therefore that's it. And originally it was okay, let's make sure that Heroku looks as good as possible. Let's come up with 12-factor app, and that pushes Heroku as this awesome platform because it doesn't do what the other guys do. When it wasn't always the best thing.
Yeah. So do you have a reference? I'm just curious. Do you have something else that you would give to someone?
No.
No, you just have notes. You just have notes.
I have no answers.
Yeah.
I just have complaints. Yeah.
Well, those are valid complaints. And I would just say,
and I guess maybe 12-factor is fine with these caveats.
Right. Almost like we need to disclaimer.
Extra disclaimer.
Understand that it was written 12 years ago and has mostly not been replaced with maybe more modern concepts. I love that they put examples in, but you're right. Like, the conceptual parts are probably the more important part, and the implementations or the examples of, hey, for example, do this, right? But there's so much of it that is still super valid today that I quote to people that it's hard for me to throw it out. Like the log statement, I still have to train people and still have to talk about it in conference talks about don't put your logs in files. You need to stream your logs to output. And of course in Docker actually made that a standard. And when we all go back, if you look at this was basically a roadmap for how they designed Docker. And whether or not you're using Docker today, if you're using containers, so much of what, the port binding process, the application of statelessness, the idea of statelessness, there's so many of these things in here. The build, release, run, that's exactly, like that's the motto for Docker is build, release, run, strictly separate out. Whereas like not even 10 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, I was still building on the production server before we would put it into production. We would put all the apps on. If we had any sort of, if we needed to do website, JavaScript builds, we weren't using TypeScript at the time, but if we wanted to minify things or do any of that sort of build stuff, we were doing that on the production server before we would release it. We weren't doing it somewhere else and putting it in a container because we didn't have containers. And the concepts here, of course, were hard to achieve. I think much harder to achieve before we went container. And it's almost like they came out. I don't know if this has any influence on the people at Docker when they were at .cloud and they made this idea, but like it almost seems like this was the manual that Heroku had, their lessons learned. Docker took it and ran with it, implemented it as a tool. They called it Docker containers, and now the rest of us all get to enjoy it as long as we follow it. But I still, one of the first things in our courses is still things like, hey, if you're putting your app in the container, you need to take those logs and put them to STD out, standard out, not into the log files on the hard drive of the server. And a lot of the ports, it's a whole different thing now. Our ports are dynamic. Kubernetes manages them for you, and load balancers automatically connect to the right ports at the right time. And it's all kind of wonderful now. But if we go back, anyway, if you go back far enough, the whole point of this tweet was if you go back far enough, you look at the Agile Manifesto from 20 years ago, still true today. Still, it's maybe not as juicy and like, oh yes, I got to do this, but it was a new idea 20 years ago.
One of the areas where for the Docker example, one of the places where it was true for Docker early on, but maybe not as much now, I think around the dependencies. And dependencies, sure, you explicitly declare and isolate dependencies, and that's true in a Docker file as long as you kind of like squint and don't look too closely, because as you saw with the the extensions and being able to look at all the licenses that are used and the how these things are like layers after layer after layer after layer after layer of other stuff. You're using one image as a source, but that image used this other image, which used this other image, which used this other image, which used this other image, and you've got you know what your dependency is, but its dependencies are so huge you don't really know. You don't. You're
you implicitly trust
at top level, but not. You're implicitly trusting. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, which is true of everything down to the hardware. Right? Like every once in a while we're reminded about a cell phone manufacturer in China that we maybe shouldn't trust their chips. And it's like, it's like how, at what level do I just need to implicitly trust from there down? There's always all of us have that level. Like maybe it's your dependent apps. Maybe it's the Linux OS you're on. Maybe it's the cloud you're on. Like there's at some point you just go, I'm hoping it's okay. I'm just hoping it's fine. Paul Chen's asking about, or mentioning the 12 factor for serverless, which I have not read. And I'm not sure. I see Stackery. I'm not sure if you've heard of this, but this I see an Amazon post, a Stackery post, several places. The 12 factors of serverless, or something. I was kind of looking for like the post, and I don't really see it. So, NewStack has one. Oh, it looks like NewStack is breaking it down one by one. But yeah, so the point is, what was the point of that conversation? The point was is we are all starting to make the same errors of the past, and this all started for me months ago, and I can't even find the tweet anymore. Where an older gentleman of my age, and he was basically saying that he's tired of going to conferences because he listens, and he was specifically talking about programming and like programming concepts and languages, frameworks, things inside the language. And he was saying that there seems to be nothing new to learn anymore because all the talks he goes to are just repeating the same stuff they learned 20 years ago, and they're just saying it with a new buzzword in front of it. The new framework where this is what we do. And he was sort of saying that none of us are learning, or none of the new people are learning the lessons that we learned in the past. We don't have a methodology for how anyone even does that. And it turned into a tweet of mine that was basically a joke around, well, in order to do that, we basically have to turn all of the lessons into TikToks. And a little, this is my old man joke on the young as the way that they consume information. But it's really like, if you can imagine, 20 years ago, we had, I think there's a post in here I also made. It's like 20 years ago, we were reading white papers and books in bookstores. Somewhere I had a reply. And I can't find it. Oh, yeah. Our industry now learns through blogs and videos by searching. Our search algorithm is designed as to only show us new stuff. It has a short half-life. 15 to 25 years ago, we were primarily learning through books and blogs. Most are no longer available. Going back further, it gets worse. So how in the world are we actually supposed to learn from the lessons of the past if a lot of that information is either hard to get, expensive to get, or isn't even available? And and how do we separate the wheat from the chaff? Like, how do we find the things that 20 years ago that are still really relevant and still very valuable, and that we all should be learning that we didn't learn in university? Not that I went there, so I wouldn't even have known if it was in university. I skipped school. Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about something you brought to the table, because this has not affected me, but I'm very curious if people have questions about it, or did it affect them. Last week, was it a week ago?
It was last Friday.
Last Friday.
Yeah.
On a Friday. Yay, Friday deploy. GitHub announced that they accidentally put a key in Git for just a hot second.
Except even in this article, it lists like I don't know, like a 3-hour, 4-hour time period where they knew it happened. They started to resolve it, but then they pulled back, and then 2.5 hours, 3 hours later, they actually deployed the new RSA key. And so the problem was that they exposed their private RSA key for GitHub. And so when you try to push changes to GitHub, you're using your private key. So you've shared your public key onto GitHub. There's a page on GitHub where you have a little text box. You paste in your public SSH key, and then into your known hosts file is copied their the first time you try to connect, GitHub's public RSA key. If you're using RSA, the public RSA key is copied to your known hosts, but now they've had to change their RSA key, so the public RSA key that you have in your file no longer matches what's on GitHub, or no longer matched as of Friday. And so when you try to commit to, or try to push that commit to GitHub, you get a warning basically saying, this isn't in your known host file. Is there I think
it's
it
a
might
scary
mention
warning.
a man in the middle attack, or it's some kind of scary warning.
It
like,
is
are
scary.
you sure this is this host? It doesn't. I mean, SSH doesn't know that GitHub is this important site. It just says this could be a bogus site, and are you sure you want to do it? And so once you're sure, then you need to go into, I think you need to go into known hosts and delete that line that has that RSA public key. And then next time you try to connect, it'll say, hey, do you want to trust this site? And then it'll add it to your known hosts.
Yeah. It's a good PSA. Do they put the
Yeah.
yeah, they tell you how to resolve your own system. So I'm
Yeah.
just gonna put this in chat. If you haven't read this and you're listening, you probably are someone who's in charge of stuff like servers, connecting to things, software, or something like that. So this is actually something that has to happen if you're using the RSA key, which Matt and I were talking before the show, and I wasn't even sure if I was using the RSA key versus the other keys, and what
Mhm.
about all my servers that
And
might
so
need to,
there's
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's I guess there's 3 or 4 ways you could, if you're committing and pushing data, pushing your commits up to GitHub, you could be connecting through HTTPS, in which case you have to authenticate yourself each time you do the, I don't
Hmm.
know, maybe it's once per
Yeah,
session,
yeah,
and then or you could use SSH using either an RSA key or the ECDSA key or the ED25519 key. I happen to have gone up to GitHub and pasted in my ED25519 key, and so I don't use the RSA key because the RSA key is like long, and the
yeah,
ED25519 key fits on one line and is
yeah.
pretty.
Also, what a great
Um,
name for anything. The ED two five
yeah,
five one nine key. Like it just rolls off the
yeah,
tongue. It's like butter.
yeah, totally.
Um, yeah. So
Of course, yeah, yeah,
you don't know. You don't know here if you have this problem until you have the problem. It's one of the problems of this. Is
yeah,
like
yeah.
everything can be fine for you. Like me, it's been fine for me. Um, I use HTTPS for all of my Git calls nowadays, and the only reason that's even sane, like you're pointing out with HTTP, is that you're not storing that key on disk like you would with SSH normally. You're usually got some sort of cache, and you got a system in the background that's storing the key for you. That and it depends on your OS and what tools you're using. Like we all have various ways that this happens, but in order to make it sane, you have to have something that's at login storing the key so that every time you do a Git call, you don't have to reauthenticate. I use 1Password. It stores all my keys like that. It's amazing, and it's smart enough. If you're someone who's into 1Password, or if you didn't know that 1Password did this and you were looking for an excuse to use 1Password, it stores in its own secure enclave of the app. It stores all these keys and it keeps track of which apps per session or per login or per reboot, because you can control all the settings in there. And I basically have it set to always allow until I reboot or until the app restarts. So if I'm in an iTerm or a terminal window and I use a command line tool, it'll ask me once for my bio, my fingerprint, or my master password, and then it won't ask me again until I restart that app. So basically, 1Password is keeping track of the PID, the process ID of that app, so that it won't ask me again for that app. That's the settings I set up until I reboot, and it's fantastic. It works with everything. It works with my GitHub command line, the GH command. It works with a whole bunch of other commands I use. It has a ton of plugins, including Argo, Kubernetes, Docker. You can actually have it storing passwords for a ton of command line tools. They have like dozens of plugins in their system. Anyway, that was not meant to be an ad for 1Password, but it helps me avoid even using an SSH key. So.
And then somewhat related on the HTTPS side is the idea of, if you, I don't know all the details, but if you log in to certain sites, and maybe the next time you visit that site within a given session, you don't have to re-log in because of sometimes a session token that is stored
Right.
somewhere. Um, Now, an interesting video to watch is last week, I think, Linus from Linus Tech Tips um, posted how he basically lost his YouTube channel because somebody downloaded some file that had some sort of, I don't know, Trojan or something that was then able to copy um, basically the all the local store for that person's GitHub, or not GitHub, Chrome browser, and the session token was in there for logging into YouTube, and therefore the person was able to delete all the stuff in all the videos in YouTube and start posting videos about how Elon Musk does crypto something, some weird videos around crypto, pushing people towards buying something bad.
Oh yeah,
Um,
buy some crypto.
but yeah, yeah. So
So yeah, don't install extensions. I mean, extensions now are so depending on which ecosystem you're in, and I'm in the Apple ecosystem in terms of my local machine. Like we have in a lot of cases, I don't use the store for a lot, like the Apple Store on my Mac, right? I maybe have like a half a dozen apps from the store or something, but most things come outside that channel. And we're to the point where we tend to get our software from a trusted source that has at least vetted it. That is
well,
what
the
I find
problem
that.
wasn't. Yeah,
Oh, I was going to say, but
problem wasn't
extensions
the software. Yeah, it wasn't a problem with the extension. It was a problem with somebody. They were doing a new sponsor. They rely on sponsors to do a lot of their videos, and so one of their people was looking at um, a contract that came in from a possible new sponsor for a video. That document was, I don't know, I think it might have been a Word document,
must have been had to have
and
been
didn't it just didn't even think. It thought, okay, this is a legitimate person, and
right. It's a
this is
document. I'm
actually a
opening it. Yeah.
legitimate deal, and didn't think anything of it at the time. Opened this document, didn't think of anything of it because nothing bad happened right away.
Right.
And
Right.
then it wasn't until a little bit later that they, there's a video of Linus basically looking at his site, not wearing much, but just because it's late at night, and just seeing everything disappearing and trying to flounder around to figure out what's going on.
Whoa.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. So we were all defending against vulnerabilities in Word in like 2001, and here we are 20 some years later.
Yes.
That's why I was saying it's either, if it's going to be a document bug exploit, it's going to be either Word or Adobe Photoshop, not Photoshop,
PDF,
Acrobat.
Acrobat.
Acrobat, yeah.
And
That's
it
why
might
I
have been
never
a PDF as well. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I don't ever put on a Mac. I always use Preview, because not that Preview is like the most amazing app, but it's most likely not going to have the vulnerabilities that Acrobat. I don't even know if Acrobat still has the systemic problems that it used to have, where we were back in a decade ago. We were getting an update every month. Like you get your Windows updates every Tuesday, second Tuesday, and then you get an Acrobat update every month because it was so full of holes. Yeah, and it's sad that those things are still around today.
I could totally see it happening because I mean, in every year at Datadog, we had to go through the same, the training to look for phishing attacks, and I was always like, every time I had to go through that, I knew exactly what to do. I could identify all the things. I always made sure I knew that I'm not going to be suckered into this phishing attack, and yet I got this offer. Somebody wanted to sponsor one of my videos. I mean, I'm not a big YouTuber. I mean,
Yeah,
I don't know.
yeah.
And it's like, oh, somebody's going to pay me money. Great. Let's learn about. And we had a few discussions back and forth, and then they sent this contract, and it looked legitimate until, I mean, afterwards I looked back and like, oh wow, how could I have been so stupid? But I tried to open up this file with this contract because everything was looking good, and luckily the file wouldn't open because it was some other format that only exists on Windows, and I have a Mac, and that's what saved me. And then I start looking into like, wait a second, why'd your email address not quite what I expected? And and so I mean, I could have experienced this. And then, I mean, Linus Tech Tips, I mean, what saved them was they have a contact at YouTube that, because they're such a high level producer of videos on YouTube, they had somebody to save them. And I wouldn't have that.
Yeah.
Anyway,
right.
this is not
restore from backups.
Yeah.
By the way, I don't know if Faisal, sorry if I'm mispronouncing that, if we have a new member, but they did it right before the show went live. So they get the mega horn. They get the reggae horn anyway, but they may not be around, but we got a new member. So that happened. Check your SSH keys with GitHub. Uh, Sabin's actually giving the files are also padded to be so large that you can't scan them with virus scans. And they said something about it's not a document, it hides as a document by using a weird hack with Unicode. So we like, if you're interested more in that, don't take our advice or our facts, because we don't know anything. So there's definitely some advanced stuff going on. But yeah, if someone's sending me a file, the only way I'm going to be opening that file nowadays is through Google Drive previews, right? Like you can actually open it in the browser through a Google Drive preview. And I don't even think we have. I mean, I might have Word installed. I don't even know if I've ever used it on this computer. So no one has any questions, huh? Basically, the internet was a mistake and everything is on fire. That's why I have this thing back here, over here. It's all fine. It was a good idea. It just, not secure by default. So the last thing I wanted to bring up, in case nobody has any questions, is who here is using Starship Prompt? Probably a lot of you. I'm a big fan ever since I found out about it. Someone on the internet told me about it way back in the day. Starship Prompt, it can be used with many, many things. So you don't have to like switch from what you're doing to use it. It's just a prompt. It's cross shell, it's cross OS, and it has probably what I would consider the most sane configuration out there versus I used to use ZSH themes and prompt themes for ZSH, and they were not sane, and they were always ugly hacks. And Starship is great because you can do everything in YAML. It's very pretty, comes out of the box with all the pretty stuff, and you can customize it. So the thing I did with a gist, which I'm sharing, I'll just put this tweet in chat in case anyone would like it. So if you want to check out Starship Prompt, it's great. It's not the only one out there. There's lots of prompt theme engines and all that stuff, but it's pretty great. It's my new favorite. And one of the things I did was I had this weird little quirk, one weird little trick. So what I wanted to do on my machine is anytime I go to a Git repo in Starship Prompt, it's actually pretty smart. It automatically will make the beginning of that GitHub repo or that Git repo, and it's just Git. It'll make the beginning of that Git repo, whatever directory is the root directory of that repo, it'll make that the root of your prompt. So it ignores the rest of your path. So in this case, you're seeing that my auto deploy directory, which is its own Git repo, is actually, it's a subdirectory. And you don't necessarily need to know all that when you're in a repo. You're focused on that repo software. So out of the box, it does that. But what I wanted to know was the org/repo or user/repo, because a lot of us are probably forking software off your company or off of open source. And I often will have their clone on my machine and then a clone of my fork on my machine. So I've got two directories in two different windows, both called auto deploy. It's a problem of mine. It might be a problem of yours. So what I did was I kind of wanted to know it was GitHub. I wanted to know if it was using GitHub. And I wanted, whether it was GitHub or Bitbucket or GitLab, I kind of wanted to know that because some companies mirror their software across multiple repos or multiple, I don't know what you call it, SaaS platforms. And then I wanted to know the org as well as the repo that I'm in because I have multiple forks copied. So I have a gist, and that gist I was able to basically figure out with a couple of lines of YAML how to accomplish that. It wasn't in the docs. I searched through the forums. Nobody was doing it. I thought maybe I'm crazy. Maybe no one else cares about this. You can also change your success character and your failure character. And of course, when I have success, I have bourbon. So my success is always bourbon. Maybe if we were at the beach, it's maybe a Mai Tai, whatever that little tropical drink logo is. But bourbon by default. And so that way, whenever I'm in a repo, you can see now on my screen that it has a little Octocat logo, and then the organization or user that it's in, and then the directory. Now, this is assuming that you set up your local paths This isn't literally going to GitHub and looking up the organizational user or whatever. It's not. It's also not looking in the .git file for the config. It's simply looking at my directory path because my local directory organization, it mirrors that of the organization I'm pulling it from, the name of the repo that it's from. I'm pretty, because most of us probably have dozens and dozens of repos on our machines, so you've got to come up with something sane, and that's what I did. So I wanted to share that.
I shared something related in the chat,
Ooh.
just an alias that I use to basically, if I'm in a GitHub repo or a Git repo, kind of deep in, I can do a git root,
Oh, a
or
git
actually I
root.
have that abbreviation of GR, and it goes to the root of that repo.
That is a cool one. I like that alias, git root.
So I use yeah. So I also use fish shell. So there's a feature of fish shell called abbreviations, and with abbreviations, if I type in gr space, it replaces that on the command line with git root, and git root is an alias to other things. So I don't actually type git root. I just type in gr, and it automatically goes to that.
Nice. Oh, and you don't have to make a special alias for that, as you're saying. Is it automatically?
Yeah.
It automatically. Yeah. And how does it do that? I mean, is it? They're not two words. How is it doing gr instead of gitr? Like,
so there's this idea of in fish shell. There's an idea called an abbreviation, and so I have an abbreviation that is, well, what are some of my abbreviations? I can't even remember what they are. Like K. If I type in K, and then space, it on the command line, it's kind of like text expander or something, but for the command line for the shell, and it expands that to kube control. And then I can do, or maybe I do KD, and it auto completes the kubectl describe. And the benefit of that is that I'm often at a conference on stage doing a talk. I don't want to type in. I want to type in KD, but I don't want people to think, KD, what's that? That doesn't make. How do I do that at home? So I get the benefit of typing something short, but everybody watching me in the audience or in a video sees, the full thing, and he's just this super fast typist.
Right. But so they don't notice. Yeah, it's so fast they don't notice. Yeah.
And because video or on screen, maybe there was a lag in the display and it didn't see that, so I get to type real fast and get it out. But so I have an alias gr that just, if I type in gr, it expands that out to git root, which is an alias on my system to actually that command that I shared.
Very cool.
Fig, of course, that's Fig as well. That's awesome.
Yeah, I only recently learned about Fig. And I don't think I've tried it yet. The thing that I do, since we're talking about conferences and like hiding all your complexities, I had to learn the hard way. I made a whole course that turned out to be extremely successful on the internet with all of my hacks included, and I get probably 1/3 of the questions are, how did you do that in the terminal? And so I ended up making an FAQ in the course, not even related to the content, just, okay, if you see me type this is what I did. And now I've learned, okay, I never shall present or show a video again with any fancy, like I might show the prompt, like that's one thing, but I won't have anything fancy going on in my CLI because I've learned it distracts people, and two, people that don't understand the automation that's going on will actually try to type things that maybe don't work for them, right? Like abbreviations, any autocompletes, like especially if you have autocompletes that try to fill out the whole line, and people will see the whole line and they'll get distracted by that. So I actually have something called present. It's just a shell script that I created along with a couple of aliases. And what it does is it disables all ZHS plugins. It disables all prompt features. And then it just shows a whale, like essentially the emoji version of a Docker icon. And that's my indication that everything is turned off. This is ready to present. And it only shows the path from the root of wherever I want to start the presentation, so that they're not distracted by my full path or what other places. Yeah, so it changes the world to be only about this presentation, and I've had a lot of success with that, but it's very shell specific. Because it has to disable things that do things in your shell, so it's not entirely useful. But it is on my website, which if we're talking about shells for a hot minute, we are. So might as well just mention this. Everything I use in my shell, or at least everything I did at the last update, which was probably months ago, bretfisher.com/shell is what I constantly reference people to. It is a list of, I started writing this when we were still struggling with 256 colors in the shell and wanting to get beyond that, and that you needed to do all these quirky Unicode hacky things to get true color in the shell, which is now pretty much out of the box. It works. So this is about a 10-year-old document that I keep updating on my website with all, do you want fancy thing? So many of these things are solved on the internet now. Like we have nerd fonts, which is amazing. Like people just download it, they type one line command and they get a fancy font. But back when I was doing it, it was old school. We had to like go find the specific font, download it manually, and like inject emojis and stuff into it. And we now have that all already. So you had to, like back in the day, I think when I built this, you had to build NVim yourself. Nobody knew about NVim, and it was the one way you could use for more, like italics is still kind of a thing. A lot of people don't realize that italics aren't enabled in a lot of shells, and there is a way to do it. And it's very useful if you're a Vim person to see italics, because like I like to have italics on my comments, right? Because you see all that in a regular GUI editor, but it's not enabled by default in your shell. So there's still some legitimate stuff in here that, if you care about, it exists. But there's a bunch of stuff in there, including this insane wild cherry theme I never use it except for maybe some demos sometimes when I just want to be ornery. But if you look at this, it's got emojis for everything, and they all have an actual meaning, but you have to learn the meaning of the emoji. So it's got the painting your fingernails emoji, which means you've got stuff that is been added but it hasn't actually been committed yet. So it's anyway, it's kind of insane. I don't know if anyone would really seriously use it, but it even explains the emojis. New files added, ready to commit. I started using the ring emoji for this one because you got to put a ring on it. That's kind of what you got to commit it. If you're not committed, you haven't put a ring on it. So it'll put a little. That's my emojis. But I was inspired by this, so I started making up my own emoji meanings and changed them out. So the Japanese org. I didn't even know that's what you called that one. Japanese org.
Ogre.
Oh, did I say org? Ogre? Ogre? Okay. Ogre.
Ogre.
Yeah, English is my first language, and I still can't use it. All right. No questions in chat. It's a quiet day today.
No questions.
Not a lot of questions. People making great comments. Thanks, Paul and Sabine, for hanging around.
Or normally they're so bored that they have to come up with questions to keep it interesting. And this time it's so much more interesting they can't think of their questions. Maybe that's why.
Well, I feel like I'm insulted either way we do it. I'm not sure which one I prefer. The story's in your head. One last piece of news. Since we don't really have news, we just have things to talk about. This is not news, but is my browser not going to show up? There. It's thinking about it. My computer seems a little laggy today, which is not possible. I didn't think M1s could be laggy. Wait for it. That's not the button I was hoping for, but sure. We'll do this one. So Docker has another extension out. There's all these great extensions in Docker Desktop. If you're not used to using Docker Desktop's GUI, give it a shot. I'm trying to force myself to use it. I'm still old school using the command lines, but there's now an extension that allows you to dig into the images, the image layers, what's going on in there. It's called Registry Explorer. So it actually will use, instead of using just like, if you've ever used the dig command, it's actually a great little tool made by, I can't remember the guy's name. I need to, I mention it all the time, but I forget his name. And this is now actually looking at Docker Hub and breaking down stuff from Hub, which I think is pretty cool. Because the more insight we have into our images, and if you haven't tried in this just the last month, if you haven't tried Docker Desktop, the view that it has over your images and scanning and using SBOMs to be able to determine which layers have the vulnerability and if you're from images have the vulnerability, so that you know, basically it's the blame. It's like the get blame of Docker images. And that's all now built into Docker Desktop by default, which is pretty great. So it's just getting better and better.
The new Docker Desktop UI, the only reason I would go into it before was just to adjust settings around the Kubernetes that was built into Docker Desktop. And that's it. I'd never touch anything else. But now with the extensions, I mean, having Portainer, I mean, I have Portainer on other places, but having it just in Docker Desktop in the UI is awesome. It's awesome.
Yeah.
And all the other extensions for looking at those licenses that, or looking at all the other layers and understanding it. I mean, it's just great stuff.
Yeah. I have somehow broken side note. I've somehow broken the live streaming software today, and I have lost the view where you and I are sitting next to each other. So we're gonna get this. We're gonna get this, and then we're gonna get this, which used to be you and I side by side. That somehow, somehow I did something that made it go away. Don't know what I did. All right. Matthew saying, just started your course, got the YouTube live doc, and you happen to be live. Now I have to install new terminal fun stuff. Perfect. Well, welcome to the course. Thanks for purchasing it or using it as a part of your Udemy for Business license. And I hope it goes well for you. And that's why we're here. We're here to talk about it. We're here to talk about questions you have in DevOps and Docker land. I'm just going to bring up a blank browser tab because someone has to pick the topic other than me. Oh, someone's actually reading the Phoenix Project.
News or anything.
I don't read Hacker News. It's like the worst version of the front page of Reddit. It's just I rarely see things there that aren't a complete waste of time.
Working at I mean, Datadog was I don't know where that came out. Was Techstar? I don't think it came out of Y Combinator. I don't know. But
yeah, it did. Hacker News did? Yeah, Hacker News.
No,
I think it was
Hacker News did, but Datadog I was thinking of.
Like their origin.
I don't know what the origin. But I never really paid attention to Hacker News until I started working at Infra, and that is a very recent Y Combinator, company that came out of Y Combinator 2021, and so all of them are like Hacker News is like a source of news, and so now I find myself in Hacker News all the time.
Well, if that is your community, then that makes total sense. Yeah. But it's definitely not my community. I mean, not that I don't like them. It's and a lot of my friends are on there. In fact, I don't actually have to go on Hacker News because anything significant that comes out of there, I'm usually finding it from one of my friends. So I just use the friend filter and find out. And usually that's the question. It's like, oh, someone tells me something interesting. I'm like, how'd you find that on Hacker News? And I was like, oh, well, cool. I maybe should check that out someday. I'm just there to like the things that my friends do. Like I'm usually there to just upvote somebody's thing.
Going back at the beginning of this session when we were talking about Neva and Google and Bing, the topic or you mentioned Bing. I started playing around with Bing again just yesterday. I think yesterday. I had to I think I had to load up Edge as well on my Mac to get the whole experience. But now because of you keep talking. Chad.
Yeah, you keep talking, and I'm just gonna keep playing because I'm gonna fix it. I'm gonna fix it live.
Yeah, so now you've got the chat interface in Bing, and it is ChatGPT. Um, and so you have all the benefit. I don't know. I think all the benefits of ChatGPT, maybe without paying the extra $20 a month for the
Mm.
ChatGPT 4. Um, and I don't know if I have access to the Bing stuff because we have was it Microsoft 365 Business for my wife and I as a home kind of business
Yeah.
account because because I used to work at Microsoft. I get that whole business account, which I don't know is like normally like $30 a month. We get it for $30 a year,
Ooh,
because I'm ex Microsoft, which is awesome. But um, yeah, so I'm not sure if I'm seeing that because of that or does everybody see it? But it's pretty cool. It's pretty neat having that interface or having that chat interface, and being able to ask it like, what is the I asked it pretty recently, um, what is the best way to explain being nice to our 4-year-old,
oh,
what are some
what does
ways
it
to be
mean to be
nice?
nice?
Yeah, yeah, and like having it come up. I mean, like most of them were like, okay, that's obvious, but there were some things like, oh, that's a really great idea, and so we're
I like it.
you know learning how to be better parents through ChatGPT.
And by the time they're an adult, like that'll be normal. But for now, you might get judged for that. I mean, I have to come up with reasons to use this stuff because once you get past the novelty of it, it's like, okay, what am I really like? What is this going to give me on a day to day basis? That besides, I already have Copilot. So did I lose you? You look frozen in the screen. Matt looks frozen. Well, all right. So unless Matt comes back, I'm going to wrap this up because we've been going for over an hour. But maybe my computer is just slowly dying over here because at first things were laggy and then the browser wasn't working. Now he's frozen and then I lost my video screen. So yay, I got the new Mac update yesterday and maybe that's part of the problem. So see if we got any questions here real quick. Jobasti, sorry if I mispronounced that. Would you recommend to get started with Kubernetes? I mainly did Docker about 8 years ago, bought your Docker Mastery course, and can't wait to start it. Well, you probably need a Docker review because Kubernetes knowledge requires Docker. I mean, all Kubernetes does is it runs multiple containers across multiple servers. So it's like a multi-server Docker. And it needs Docker or another container runtime underneath. Kubernetes doesn't run its own containers. Kubernetes tells a container runtime to run containers. So you need to understand those fundamentals. How do you build images? How do you run images in a container? How do you deal with volumes? How do you deal with networks, secrets, all that stuff? Once you've learned that in Docker, then you can build on top of that with Kubernetes. So if you need a refresher, absolutely start from the beginning. Plus, Kubernetes is better as an operator tool. It originally wasn't designed to be a developer tool. We can all run it locally, but it was never originally designed to be used for local development and testing. So we've kind of taken it and shoved it in, but it doesn't always work that way. Looks like Matt might be back soon. Different browser maybe? No? I can't hear you. It might be issues on my end. It seems like I'm having quirks today with the latest Mac update. Also, thanks so much. Sadih's back. What's up? I got a super sticker. Thank you so much for another super sticker. You are the champion of super stickers. I really appreciate you. So hopefully that helps, Jabasti. Would I recommend getting? Yeah, you asked about the Docker course, and then I didn't put a ring on it. Thanks, Raj. How how do I recommend to get started with Kubernetes? Take my courses. If you bought my course, it will teach you Kubernetes. That's how you get started. I'm not trying to be sarcastic, but how would you recommend to get started with Kubernetes? If you have my Docker Mastery class, that Docker Mastery class comes with Kubernetes now. So learn that. And then maybe after you've learned that, if you want to learn even more about Kubernetes, you can take the Kubernetes Mastery class. But the Docker Mastery class is meant to give you enough knowledge to get started as a user of Kubernetes. After you've learned Docker, after you've learned Compose, and some other things, you can try out Kubernetes. It even in Docker Mastery's course, it builds on Kubernetes builds on the knowledge of Swarm. So you actually learn Swarm first, because Swarm is really a simpler, easier version of Kubernetes. It's not as wide adopted. It doesn't have as many extensions and features and functionality and extra stuff, but it's still the same core concepts. So you still learn Swarm because there are still plenty of Swarm users, and we've actually seen a resurgence in Swarm lately as the simple orchestrator. And then take the Kubernetes sections. There's plenty of sections on Kubernetes. There's also now new sections as of this year in that course for teaching you how to use GitHub Actions for helping you build and ship your containers to a registry. So those are in there as well, and you'll learn those as part of the course. So I look forward to hearing your feedback. So good luck on that. Matt is a super sticker by yourself. Okay. I don't know why I can't hear you. I can't. It's like if I bring you in, you're there, but I don't have any of your audio. That's weird. It says guest has muted themselves. The computers are lying. Oh, well. Well, we're going to wrap this up anyway because we've been going for a while. And I really appreciate you all for being here. And thank you, Raj, and all of you that have bought the course or given a super sticker or are members of the channel. I really appreciate the generosity in the community. And I hope to see you here next week. By the way, who's coming up next? We've got, it's mime time. Matt's going to do his miming while I tell you on the future show. Next we've got Falco. Have you heard of the Falco project? Also, see, my camera's even wigging out today. The Falco project runs on Kubernetes clusters, or really anywhere you want to run it, but it allows you to monitor for bad behavior on your clusters. So you can find out if people are using an exec or running a shell when they shouldn't, or running specific commands or doing certain things with the kernel. That's Falco. It's a great project. It's something I recommend in all Kubernetes clusters. It uses eBPF, last I remember. And they're going to be on the show. Two of the maintainers are going to be on the show next week. Also, we've got coming up Corey Quinn from the Duckbill Group. We're going to talk about the 17 ways to run containers on AWS. That is in May. We've got Kasten coming on, talking about Kubernetes storage. That's going to happen in June. And then also in June, we're going to have Brendan Burns from Microsoft. He's going to be here. He's one of the founders of the Kubernetes project. So he's going to be here. We're going to be talking about the future of containers and more. So come back on Thursdays when we're live. And
I don't know why I got booted off.
Oh, and your mic's back.
Oh, you hear me now? Oh,
yes.
Hey, look at that. I thought I just had to say silly things in the chat.
Yeah.
About Rocky Amadeus and Falco.
It wasn't me dropping you off because I suddenly didn't like you
I was
anymore.
deviating too much from the DevOps topics. Fine, get rid of this guy.
You're talking about SSH. How dare you?
If he mentions Bing and ChatGPT one more time, he's out of here.
Well, we're gonna have to have a whole show on it. So,
Yeah.
AI, generative AI for DevOps. That needs to be a recurring segment once a quarter or something. We just have to come up with interesting things to talk about because everything I want to talk about, I talked about last year. To me, ChatGPT for DevOps isn't that interesting yet. So, because it's general.
Awesome.
It is pretty awesome. I pay for GPT-4, but I have it check my syllabus. I have it do things like write me a syllabus for 3 hours talking about Argo CD, just to make sure that when I'm making the content up that I didn't forget a topic or I didn't. And it's good. It's better than Notion's GPT interface. Notion has their own built-in GPT, and ChatGPT 4 is much more detailed and accurate than the one in Notion. So I haven't like pitted it against 3, but I mean they did that in their own video and it looked great. So no, we'll definitely talk about it. And that was not the reason.
One question I have. I